COVID-19 has highlighted the value of e-education. One way in which e-education can improve learning is through self-marking electronic quizzes which can extend learning time and provide rapid individualized feedback without requiring a teacher's input. Unfortunately, though, e-education is a lot more viable in richer than in poorer contexts. Hello. I'm Angela Stott from the University of the Free State, South Africa, and this presentation is about research related to an intervention where I tried to promote e-learning in poor South African township schools during my work as a mentor to science teachers. The section of research I want to tell you about today is a questionnaire-based study focusing on learners' and teachers' beliefs about using electronic quizzes. Even though the study is fairly small-scale and exploratory, I do believe it reveals important lessons which can help people like myself who are trying to find ways to improve the uptake of ICT in education. I'd like to briefly mention the main suggestions for practice emerging from this study up front, after which I'll explain the theoretical framing, the method, and the findings which I argue support this. I found that learners from poor backgrounds are very enthusiastic about using electronic quizzes out of school time to learn science, especially to revise work that their teacher has already taught them. Also, it's effective to hold a competition at the end of an intervention period. The learners have to engage with a minimum number of quizzes to gain entry to the competition, and in the competition you publicly test the knowledge covered by the quizzes in a fun way. That motivates the learners to work with the quizzes, and it also motivates their teachers to provide them with access to devices on which the quizzes run. It seems to me that the main threat to such an intervention is that if the software runs on a computer, then most learners can only gain access to it at school, and the teachers who gatekeep this access consider giving this access to the learners to be a considerable sacrifice. Of course, these lessons are most applicable to contexts similar to the one I studied, which is poor South African schools. However, it is possible that some of the findings could have some applicability to richer contexts, because it seems that belief systems regarding ICT usage in education are the limiting factor to ICT uptake throughout the world. For example, in the 80s, Bill Gates made this statement. His prediction regarding work and entertainment does seem to have been accurate, but the learn part, not so much, at least at school level. Now, COVID might change this in richer parts of the world, but pre-2020, this was a typical classroom even in richer parts of the world. In poorer classrooms, the desks just tend to be more densely packed and more learners sit at a desk, but otherwise the format is pretty similar. And these are also similar to William Shakespeare's classroom in the 16th century. So why is this? Over the past 3 decades, researchers throughout the world have used theories which link beliefs to behavior to try to understand what makes people use ICTs or not. According to the theory of planned behavior, these beliefs include attitudes towards the behavior, beliefs about what other significant people think about the behavior, called subjective norms, and the person's perception of the control they are able to exert over the behavior. If the behavior that we're referring to is the use of ICTs in education, then the theory of planned behavior states that this is affected by attitudes towards ICTs, external expectations to use ICTs in education, and the access and confidence people have in using ICTs in education. Clearly, each of these is heavily context dependent. The context in which this study is situated is poor South African schools. 80% of South African learners are classed as being poor, and they attend severely underperforming schools. From 2014 to 2017, I worked as a mentor to help teachers working in these kinds of schools. I did this within the University of the Free State's Social Responsibilities Project. The University of the Free State is situated in Bloemfontein, which is in the centre of South Africa, and I would travel daily to the townships of Botshabelo and Tabanshu, where I worked over the years in a total of 15 underperforming schools in these very poor areas. In all these schools, I found donated computers and tablets, but they were locked up and they were unused. So I loaded software that I'd created onto these computers and tablets, and I taught the learners and the teachers how to use them. The software is curriculum aligned and includes electronic quizzes. I made these quizzes with hot potatoes freeware. There are various types of quizzes: match, gap fill, sequence, multiple choice, and crossword. After answering, the learner presses a check button and then they get immediate feedback. And then they're also expected to correct their errors before they proceed. The part of this intervention referred to here happened 3 years into my mentorship period in these schools. This intervention spanned 3 months and it targeted grade 8 and 9 learners in 5 schools. The topic was energy and change, which mainly comprises electric circuits. The electronic quizzes are all aligned to the South African Natural Sciences curriculum and they're all language supportive. The teachers chose higher achieving learners who wanted to participate to be part of the intervention. For each of the 5 schools, I supervised at least 1 session at the start of the 3-month period, and this was with the learners in the school computer lab, and I showed those who hadn't yet used the software how to use it. I also made a timetable together with each of the teachers regarding out-of-class times when the learners could have access to the computers to work on the software for at least half an hour each week. And that was done during the reading or homework periods or during break. I suggested to the teachers that they either leave the learners unsupervised or that they sit in the classroom doing their own work while the learners worked on the quizzes, because the learners all knew how to work on the software on their own. And the reason why I made those suggestions was that one of the motivations for using these quizzes is that they can extend learning and teaching time without burdening the teacher. I also monitored this intervention over the 3-month period. However, except at one school which provided 2 hours of access to the learners every school day for this period, the other schools did not implement the intervention as consistently as I'd hoped. But that's not surprising because these schools are known to suffer from dysfunctionality. However, all the learners in the sample did engage with the quizzes to some degree, and that was required for them to qualify for an inter-school science competition held at the end of the intervention period. At the start of this day-long competition, the learners and their teachers completed questionnaires about their use of the software and their beliefs about the software. Most of the questions were given in a 5-point Likert scale format, but they were also open-ended questions. The learners and the teachers' questionnaires were similar to one another, but the wording of each was appropriate to that one's perspective. I created the questionnaire specifically for this research, guided by literature on ICT uptake from the perspective of the theory of planned behaviour. All this was done to answer this research question. What are the teachers' and learners' attitude beliefs, subjective norms, and perceptions of behavioural control relevant to use of natural sciences curriculum-based electronic quizzes? The sample consists of 71 learners and 3 teachers who participated in the intervention, attended the competition, answered the questionnaires, and also gave informed written consent to be included. To analyse the data, each of the items was assigned a numerical value, and means were calculated for each question. The questions were grouped according to each of the constructs in the theory of planned behaviour, and the means were graphed. Here we see very high attitude beliefs, both among the learners and the teachers. The items with slightly lower means are of particular interest. Notice how the learners, and particularly the teachers, agreed less with this statement, which refers to using the quizzes to learn new work, than to this statement, which refers to the quizzes helping the learners to revise work, which the teacher has already taught in class. Of course, this is to be expected to some degree in any context. However, the quizzes are part of software which includes teaching movies and can be used for self-study. And I'd hoped that the software would help the learners to learn work that their teacher hadn't taught them, because it's well known that teachers in this context often don't teach all the required work, and often they have little subject matter knowledge. But learners in this context tend to have limited language ability, including limited reading ability, and that tends to make them very dependent on their teacher as the prime and often even the only source of information in their learning of science. Given that, the teacher's response here is particularly unsurprising. However, interpreted in this light, it is encouraging that these learners responded pretty positively regarding their ability to learn new work by using these quizzes. This is a reverse item, because a low response is more favourable than a high response. So the fact that the mean is a slight agreement is somewhat concerning, although at least the mean doesn't fall in the range of a strong agreement. This is a related open-ended question. There were 3 categories of responses to this question. 1. Language difficulties, for example, suggested by these 2 answers. 2. Unfamiliarity with the work. And 3. Unfamiliarity with the technology. Again, each of these are known to be acute challenges within this context, so the finding that they mentioned isn't surprising. Rather, the learners' generally favourable responses to related items, shown here, are encouraging. This is an assertion regarding the attitude beliefs measured. Attitude beliefs were found to be very positive, particularly for using these electronic quizzes to revise already taught work, although there is the caution that the quizzes need to be language appropriate for the target audience. We see that the most influential subjective norm from the learner's perspective was the support of the teacher. And from both the learners and the teacher's perspectives, it was very important that there was the requirement that they had to engage with the software to be allowed to participate in the competition. That's summarized in this assertion. Regarding perceptions of behavioral control, the learners appeared very confident regarding their access to computers and in their language ability and level of computer literacy to be able to cope with the quizzes. That's remarkable, because most of these learners had clearly never used a computer before when I first interacted with them. This last statement, unlike the others, is a negative item, because a strong no, which corresponds to a low score, would have shown a stronger perception of behavioral control. The weak agreement here suggests a potential threat to sustainable ICT usage by the learners. In fact, it's surprising that this agreement wasn't stronger in the light of the learners' answers to this question. Which computer or computers did you use to work on these quizzes? Now, I'd given out discs with the software on it to the learners so that they could work at home. But very few could use these because very few have access to computers at their homes. So the learners are clearly very dependent on their schools to provide access to computers. So actually it seems rather strange that the participants only agreed mildly rather than strongly to this statement. It's concerning that the teachers agreed strongly that supporting the learners while they worked on the quizzes took a lot of sacrifice from them. The fact that school staff members gatekeep learners' access to computers and that they find the process of providing learners with access to the computers to involve considerable sacrifice seems to be the biggest threat to learners' use of electronic quizzes in this context. Obviously, the sample of teachers was too small from this particular study to make this assertion with much conviction. However, it is consistent with what I observed over the 4-year period in which I worked daily in this context. So in summary, in terms of the theory of planned behaviour, perceived behavioural control is the greatest threat to the use of electronic quizzes for after-school curriculum-aligned science learning in poor contexts. That's particularly the case if computers rather than mobile devices are used, because almost the only access that poor learners have to computers is at school, but teachers are reluctant to give learners access to them. Learners in this context, and maybe in all contexts of poverty, are very eager to use what richer kids might consider to be boring software to learn science even outside of their regular science lessons. They tend to participate enthusiastically if they're just provided with access and with the incentive to engage in a competition to test their knowledge at the end of the intervention period. Thank you so much for watching this presentation.